unknown here until I figure out a better name. That's what I'm going with. Short, sweet, but unimaginative it is. Today's topic is the intersection of feminism, particularly the part where women get their career first, and men who've woken up to, or at least a percentage of men who've woken up to the realization that marriage is a raw deal. So as a short summary is you have women who are hitting their 30s, when quite frankly they're less or more average from their lottery ticket they're given when they're roughly 15, 16, 18 to 25, and then they start declining in appearance and just become average. I know it's called the wall, hitting the wall, but I'm going to call it just becoming more average. And so the trend is a decline in actual first-time marriages, with huge numbers of up to 30-year-olds not marrying at all, like way over half in most developed countries. Now, one would argue that perhaps marriage is something that's from the past, and perhaps it will go to very low numbers, although higher income people in higher social classes still do marry in quite high numbers, and it's when you fall down the economic line that you start seeing a decline in marriage, and then of course the divorce rate. And the big unfortunate part is people are just waking up to it, and the illusions are gone. So if you're a man, and quite frankly you got the testosterone blinders on until you're in your 30s, touching 30, you start noticing. When you're 35, you really start noticing that, hey, that girl I was meeting last night at a date was crazy. Something you wouldn't even have picked up a decade before. And then you have women who say, I want a career. Fair enough, all about choices. But then they have less choice when they're 30, because 30-year-old men generally are looking for 25-year-old women. And if they can get them, which if they have any looks, status, income, or game, they can easily do that. And the 30-year-old women have to be looking at 35, 40-year-old men, which is a lower number. And women generally wanting to marry sideways or up are limiting their dating pool. I won't even talk about the women who set aside great long lists of things they started when they were 15, what they're looking for, which further limits their abilities. Like over 6 feet, what is that, 20% of the population? And like I said, they're now more average. And so consequently, they're competing, and they're having to actually work at it. And since women won't approach men because of the fear of rejection, which men deal with, and you can throw any excuse you want at it, but it is just rejection. And it's not even rejection, basically. Maybe the person's already dating, in a relationship, tired, etc. So consequently, they're not really rejecting you. They could just be rejecting the circumstances at that time. And you happen to be in the line of sight. So you see the pickup artists of the world who go out for 2 to 3 hours at a club, and they'll probably approach one woman every 15 minutes. And see, it's a numbers game. That's 12 women. You're probably going to get a couple of phone numbers. But women won't even bother approaching. And even with the perception, they don't want to be seen as a slut, but everyone's protesting now that women aren't sluts. So you got to ask yourself, what's it going to be? It's tough. I would argue women don't have agency. They don't want to own their problems, which is fine, but don't complain about it then. If you're going to hide, don't complain. You got to work towards something if you want it. And working towards something is not spending an hour and a half putting a dress together that makes you feel a certain way. It's actually just going out there and meeting people. That's the work. reading something recently, I don't know, in the comments section of a video, and there was a woman, her and her friends were all married actually, in their early 30s, and they actually just dressed up once every month or two, went out and dressed to the nines, their heels, everything, specifically to be noticed. And then they put back their, when they went home, they had no intention of dancing with any guys or anything. And granted, I assume they were wearing their wedding rings, but having said that, that's what guys are looking at competing with. So if you're going to speak to a few women, and they're the ones you start looking at, so you've wasted your time. And you know, the woman never mentioned that they got free drinks from the guys or something, so fair enough. They weren't being disingenuous. But it goes to show you that's just one more thing that waters down the club experience. People aren't there to meet people necessarily, women in particular. I lived with 3 girls 1 year university, and they talked about it. They come home and they talk about the guys that approached them that night. And I was always, I followed it under, well, girls talk. Then I had more of a realization that they don't think they were really intent on meeting anyone unless they're exceptional. And I'm thinking that's where the whole concept of alpha, meeting the alpha men, is. And that's interesting. So I suppose it boils down to, when you see something exceptional, you want to react to it. And if you don't have to do the approaching, then why not? But then you're a woman and you're 30, and suddenly you're not getting approached as much. You're not getting quite called ma'am yet, but the bloom is off. And like I said, average is as average does. So you ask, well, how am I going to approach that now? And I mentioned in a previous vlog, a friend of my wife and I's and broke up at 32, but at least she had a mission. I don't know who she was actually approaching, but she seemed to meet an awful lot of people. She had speed dating, etc., which is interesting. Now in the age of Tinder, I used to think that was such an advantage for women, but now I'm not so sure. I think the guys can at least go through numbers, etc., and qualify them quite rapidly, as long as they don't get catfished. I suppose catfish is not, it just makes another good story. If that ever happened to me, single, etc., I would literally turn around and walk out. Why should I waste my time if I don't have to? And that's where that falls under the average again. So when the power falls back to the men. And if you're a guy and willing to make the approaches, and through your efforts, and there's always luck, if you do exceptionally well in life, then suddenly you're the attractive one, and you're above average, and you get to make the choices. Later.